Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which the member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. You've joined us for an episode on the Preston Webb Lectures. As most Masons know, William Preston and Thomas Smith Webb are two names that are synonymous with Freemasonry, as each brother made significant contributions to the ceremonies, lectures, and ritual that is still practiced in many Masonic jurisdictions today. We have a special guest, the Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of New York, Right Worshipful Gary Heinmiller is our guest this week, and he's going to be sharing his perspectives on Preston and Webb's contribution to the craft. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, Brother Gary.
Good evening.
It's evening somewhere and everywhere in the world at this point. Let's start with a quick background check. I'm very fortunate to know your story, or at least a part of your story. And I think visitors to the Craftsman Online website and those who have read your blog articles, they're going to be familiar with you. But tell us a little bit about your role as a grand historian and, of course, the areas of Freemasonry that you enjoy studying.
Well, I enjoy studying symbolism and geometry, Masonic geometry. There's no such thing as Masonic geometry, but if you read the middle chamber lecture, it says the basis of Freemasonry is geometry.
And let's talk about your role as the grand historian for those that aren't familiar with the Grand Line and maybe just have a very light understanding of just their Blue Lodge with their Blue Lodge historian. What does the grand historian do?
Well, I started many moons ago, over 25 years ago, as an area historian, and I worked on the lodge history. I went to another lodge and another lodge and another lodge, and on my website at OMDHS is basically every lodge history.
I would not argue with the title grand historian, but to me, you're more of a grand archivist because of your website. And for our listener that was like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to write that. Don't worry. We're going to get all this information in the links to this episode here. But you've been compiling some of, I would think, like probably one of the greatest digital archives of Masonic writings and work. They go way back. Where did you get all of this material?
That represents about 1/3 of what I have posted. That's one of the interesting things I discovered, like with Masonic geometry. I can give a lecture, but it's like talking to wood. Right?
It can be tough. Yeah.
If people don't actually build the models, they'll never understand geometry.
Right.
If they don't read the history, they'll never understand the history. It's that simple. I went into books. I've started 2 libraries. I got well over 6,000 articles and books.
And we're going to share one of your papers that you wrote on Masonic geometry for our listeners as well. When you get to the show notes and for this particular episode, just click on it and you'll see it shared on the Craftsman Online website. Of course, the resources that are on Brother Gary's website, which really is, as I said, a Masonic archive, it's free. He offers all of this up to the benefit of the craft or just those that have an interest in Freemasonry. So definitely take some time out after this episode to check that out. Now, as we mentioned in the open of this podcast, Preston and Webb were not the original authors of our ritual, but they each played a significant role in enhancing the work, which I think is a very generous term, and influencing how Masonry would be practiced during their time. So let's start first with the life of William Preston. What were his particular beliefs, and how did Preston express them in his work?
New York State first published their ritual in 1964. If you go through our ritual, it's not the monitor, it's the catechism, questions and answers, and the lectures. My father's ritual book was King Solomon and his followers, and it follows it pretty closely. Also out at that time was Duncan's ritual and Ecce Oriente. Also available was Morgan's, his expose. Okay, so that's one block. I presume the Grand Lodge in 1964 consulted these works, but that's one piece of information I don't have. Where did Grand Lodge get their ritual from? I keep a copy of the 3 Preston lectures. I have a hard copy right behind me, and I have a copy on my computer, which I can punch one button and I can bring it up and scan it. That I got from Quattro Coronati Lodge in London, with the permission of the Grand Lodge of England. And it's been posted to my website. If we take a look at Preston, in 1813, there was the merger of the 2 consolidation of the lodges, the ancient lodge and the modern lodge. And Preston's work was sort of at that point abandoned, and it was worked on by Hemming and Dunkerley. I do not have a copy. If anybody can give me a link to it, for either Hemming's working or Dunkerley's working. If you go into Preston, this is not the Preston lectures. That's one where somebody gives a lecture and it's called a Preston lecture. It's not his illustrations of Freemasonry, which came out later. It's his original workings of the craft lectures.
What was that like? Was it like reading a journal, or was he writing it in a professional tone?
Let's give it to you from the horse's mouth. As a master of Caledonia Lodge number 325, Brother Preston was led, in his words, to inquire with a more minute attention into the contents of the various Masonic lectures. The rude and imperfect state in which I found some of them, the difficulties I encountered in his search after others, and the variety of modes established in our assemblies rather discouraged me on my first attempt. But he doesn't name any of his sources.
So it's almost like a personal writing, like a diary or journal, instead of a scholarly or academic research article.
Well, he goes on to say, persevering, however, in my design, I continued my pursuit, and with a few zealous friends to the cause, which he doesn't name, who had carefully preserved what ignorance and degeneracy of the age had rejected as unintelligible and absurd, I diligently sought for the ancient and venerable landmarks of the society. His first lectures were rehearsed 21 May 1772 before a number of Grand Lodge officers at a gala meeting at the Crown and Tavern. The lecture of the 3 degrees of Freemasonry was delivered as public lectures to the craft at the Mitre Tavern in 1774. Then we run across the ancients. The ancients broke off from the moderns in 1764. This was done by Lawrence Dermott. Dermott says, for the ancients, the lectures were essential, and it was one of their charges against the moderns that they abolished the old custom of studying geometry in the lodge, preferring the use of the knife and fork. This was printed in his 1764 Amazon Reason.
Interesting. So they went from kind of speculative Masons to what we would call today fork and plate Masons. It became a social club.
Yeah, it still just kind of is. There are some people that still do the research. I've heard from them from time to time, and I'm really happy to see them doing it. But you try to get in a conversation with somebody on Masonic geometry, you might as well be talking to the wall. It just doesn't work.
When you read our ritual now, which my guess is that you don't read it, you probably have it mostly memorized.
Actually, I don't.
Oh, okay. All
if you
right.
take
Well,
a look at my early Masonic documents, there's dozens and dozens of them. The ones which come to mind, of course, is Thomas Smith Webb and Preston. And there was William Finch, 1802, along with about the same period, I. Brown, Browne, and Jeremy Cross. Those were more or less monitorial works. They were not catechismical. That's why I mention King Solomon and his followers, that's the Oriente, Duncan's Ritual, and Morgan were catechismal. There's a difference, which is what we currently have is catechismal.
right.
Our current ritual is now upgrading itself, so to speak, with a narrator and various modes of presentation. They aren't changing the ritual, really, although their section on geometry is not correct. In King Solomon and his followers, the section on geometry clearly had it stated right under it. Never omit this. In 1964, they omitted it. In 2002, they put it back in after some conversations.
So when you look back on Preston's work, how much of it has survived and is still a part of what we're practicing now in 2023?
What you see in our current ritual, much of it is Prestonian. Much has been deleted as absurd and unintelligible. Like you find the word asymptotic in there, which you don't find in our current ritual. But if you take a look at asymptotic, a caduceus, the snakes winding their way down to the tails, meets the center rod. The two tails never touch the center rod. It takes a leap of faith to get to the center rod.
Wow. Okay.
That is exemplified in our lodge rooms as the senior deacon, whose symbol back in the days of yore was the caduceus. Now, if you take a look at the master in the east and the senior warden in the west, you have the senior deacon posited there to carry messages from there to there to there. This is not ritual, it's an actuality. There is a Mercury on the other side of the veil who will talk to you. We speak of the attentive ear and destructive tongue. And it says, listen to an attentive brother. He'll tell you everything you need to know. Wrong. There actually is an attentive ear and an instructive tongue. I was driving around the corner 3/10 of a mile from me in my car. And inside I heard 60 degrees equals 72 degrees. Okay. That's all I heard. I went like, oh, really? And I got home and I was standing in my garage in front of a large bookcase I had there. And the next thing that popped into my head was Timaeus. I did not have to move left or right. I bent at the waist and I pulled out the Dialogues of Plato, which was sitting right there. And in that was Timaeus. So I took it to my desk and I read it. And I found the passage, which I did it into a beautiful calligraphy piece. It's still hanging on my wall. And I was able to solve 60 degrees equals 72 degrees. Now, I've been instructed by the instructive tongue and the attentive ear, even like with the three distinct knocks we give. More or less, go ahead and knock. So I went knock, knock, knock inside. And they said, there, got that out of your system? I said, yeah. They said, now put your hand in the door and push. And I did. And my hand went right through the door. And they said, whose door is that? I said, mine. And they said, very good. This is a dialogue I had inside. Whether it's for real or not, as far as I'm concerned, it was. Next thing happened, the door disappeared. And there stood in front of me a doorway. And the natural inclination, as I was thinking to myself, was, do I step through? I said, well, I don't know anything on this side of the door. And I sure as heck won't know anything on the other side of the door. So I stood in the doorway, and the doorway disappeared. And I stood in the cosmos. This is the way I've received my instruction. It's in our ritual to utter the three knocks allude a certain passage of scripture. We got to learn our ritual. Ask, seek, and find. You can ask and then just be patient and put your linear thinking out of the way. And your answers will slowly come in what they call a third language, which is like a burst of energy. And it translates itself into words or pictures. Think of it this way. When you go to sleep at night, you're laying in bed, just sit there and watch what pops into your head. If you see a picture come, try to go to where the picture came from, and you'll discover it comes as a burst of energy. If you hear words, they come as a burst of energy in a third language, and then you translate them into something you'll understand. They actually exist. There is an attentive ear. There is an instructive tongue. If you ask, you will find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. But you need to be patient and put yourself aside. Get rid of you. One other thing, on our altar, we have a square and compass. Compass draws circles. A square draws squares. A circle represents our divinity. You are divine. There's not one person on the face of this earth that is not divine. They just need to bring it into their consciousness. Our DNA currently only allows about, if we're lucky, 30% of our consciousness, as compared to a master. Call it a master Mason, call it a master Jesus, call it whatever you want to call it. But a master runs at about 98% of their active DNA. We only run, like I said, 30 or less. We are changing. The balance between light and dark is changing. There will be more light coming. The light is already here. We're reacting to it. Our DNA cells are reacting to it. And we're going to end up really good down the road. Really, really, really good. Things we never thought about.
Well, it's a question that I've been asked by, and I've asked it myself as a newly obligated entered apprentice, and then even becoming a newly raised master mason, is when you're observing our degrees, there's definitely different sections of it. There's the first part that does seem very ritualistic, and there's physical and spiritual symbolism, and everything is in that first part where the obligation takes place. And then there's the second part of the lectures of the degrees, where they're just lectures and they seem so maybe more modern than what you previously experienced during the obligation part. And there's really no bridge between the two without giving away, what the degree experience is like. How do you help brothers answer that question? Like, why does our degree seem so different on both ends?
Another quote. Again. The observations upon the first 3 degrees are many of them taken, this is written by Webb, are taken from Preston's Illustrations of Masonry. But remember, Illustrations of Masonry for Webb and for Preston are monitorial, not catechismal, with some necessary alterations, unquote. He doesn't state what the necessary was. Mr. Preston's distribution of the first lecture into 6, the second into 4, and the third into 12 sections, not being agreeable to the mode of working in America, they're differently arranged in this work, Smith's work, Webb's work. There's no written stuff that I've been able to find that Dermott talked to Webb, or that Webb talked to Preston, or anybody talked to anybody else. Preston developed his lectures as I indicated, and he read them as I indicated. And they're voluminous. They're worth the reading. They're worth having in your library and scanning through.
Do you feel the ritual that we practice today, is it fair to say that it's a Preston Webb byproduct, then less of a collaboration?
It's called follow the bouncing ball. Seriously. The attentive ear and the instructive tongue. When I go into my Preston book behind me, I'm led there inwardly. So I pull it up and I scan for whatever pops into my head, and I look it up, and there it is. When I was working on asymptotic, I just about fell out of my chair when I saw the word in there. This is modern science, and here it is back in 1774. He mentions the word. When you get into the 3rd degree of Preston, it's not as catechismical as we would tend to think as our catechism is. It's called deputations. And there's 3 deputations, a first, a second, and a third deputation. And if you look at the first deputation, it tends to be exoteric. And if you get to the third deputation, it tends to be esoteric. If you're got your mind open to what you're reading. Don't just read the words and think you got it.
Here's my last question tonight. And again, we appreciate your time so much. We covered so many things, well, mainly you covered so many larger themes and some of the esoteric themes that extend well beyond the words that show up in our ritual that a lot of us know. When you sit down with newer brothers or younger brothers that are just getting into the craft, what advice do you have for them when it comes to where to begin?
That's easy. I tell them in the preparation room. I said, you're about to go into the lodge room. Don't pay too much attention to the words. Pay attention to the sequence of what you're going through. You'll get the words sooner or later. We have many brothers that can parrot the ritual, but do they understand what they're parroting? No. That's not the idea. Go within if you want to know. Ask, seek and find. It's there. It depends on what you want to have. There's a great deal in our ritual. And it starts with the square and compass, the divinity, and our working to get our consciousness of our divinity.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful how you summarize that, because if you think about the story of Freemasonry, and we are building our symbolic temples, and what was a temple used for back in those times, because it's still relevant today. And it's really, how do you improve that relationship with the supreme architect or the grand architect or God or whatever you want to call.
Really enforced on our altar. What's the first degree? The square is on top. Okay, that's our conscious level is square on top. And we have the 1 and 2, and then we have the circle on top. Our divinity is overshadowing our mortal being.
And when you're ready, and not when you think you're ready, but when deity believes you're ready, well, then that's when the secrets are exposed to you, which I love the idea of how the light, literally, when you close your eyes, whatever manifests as an image, that's your subconscious, your conscious. That's the thing that is larger than you, that is trying to communicate with you in a way that you can understand it. I love that.
Get rid of time, get rid of space, get rid of linearity. They don't exist. We think they do. We do that with the point, the line, the superficies, and the solid. If you take a point, look at any place in your room, and your eyes are going to have to move from one place to another. Even if you want to look at the left and the right side of the picture, even if you want to look at the man in the picture, even if you want to look at his left and his right eyeball, your eyes move. We only see a point at any one given time. The rest is through our peripheral vision, or what I call your perceptual vision. And we take it all in and point to a picture on the wall. You ain't seeing it there. You're seeing it inside of you. You're seeing the sun 93 million miles away inside of you. Everything is perceived inside at a point. An elephant is at a point. A jumbo jet is at a point. There's many wonderful things if you stop to consider them, which I have followed the bouncing ball over the years, and it's been brought to my attention in strange ways. Many strange ways.
This has been the Craftsman Online podcast. Again, I don't know how to say thank you enough. Right Worshipful Gary Heinmiller, our Grand Historian for the Grand Lodge of New York. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And Gary, honestly, for everything you've done for us at Craftsman Online, and to all the brothers in the craft.
Thank you for the Craftsman Online. It's a wonderful thing. And you being in New Jersey to boot. It's wonderful. Keep up the good work.
Will do. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We are available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.